Back in the NES days, games didn't need realistic graphics to look incredible. Great pixel art, vibrant colors, and clever design were enough to create unforgettable worlds. Some pushed the 8-bit hardware surprisingly far. So let's head back to the NES and revisit 12 games that still look amazing today. Capcom handled a Disney license exceptionally well on the NES, and Darkwing Duck is a great example of that talent. The game takes clear inspiration from Mega Man, especially in its stage structure. You begin with 3 levels to choose from, unlock another 3 after completing them, and eventually reach the final confrontation with Steelbeak. The gameplay is simple but polished. Darkwing can jump, hang from platforms, fire his gas gun, and collect different types of ammunition. The controls are tight and responsive, which becomes important because the difficulty is surprisingly high. Despite the colorful Disney presentation, enemies can take several hits, pits are everywhere, and some bosses require you to learn their attack patterns carefully. Visually, the game really shines. The stages are colorful and detailed, moving through forests, warehouses, docks, and city environments. Character sprites are expressive, backgrounds have impressive depth for the hardware, and the visual style captures the personality of the cartoon extremely well. With only 7 stages, the adventure is relatively short, and some special weapons aren't particularly useful. Still, Darkwing Duck demonstrates how much Capcom could squeeze out of the NES. Its strong pixel art, vibrant colors, detailed environments, and smooth presentation still hold up remarkably well today. The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles is a surprisingly ambitious action platformer for the NES, mixing elements that feel inspired by games like Castlevania and Mega Man. Indy begins each life with his iconic whip, but throughout the adventure you can find several weapons, including rocks, Molotov cocktails, a pistol, a shotgun, and eventually even a machine gun. The damage system's particularly interesting. A hat or gas mask essentially works as an additional hit, while carrying a weapon gives you another layer of protection. Take damage and you gradually lose these items before Indy himself goes down. It creates a simple but effective system that rewards staying well equipped, and there's also plenty of variety. The adventure takes Indy across locations ranging from Mexico to Germany, with different enemies and challenges along the way. Enemy behavior is surprisingly solid, with different firing speeds and attack patterns, and there's even a dogfight against the Red Baron to break up the traditional platforming. The controls are responsive as well. Indy can jump, attack, duck, and even crawl through tighter areas, giving the stages more flexibility than you might expect. Later bosses can become genuinely challenging, but the 5-credit system keeps things reasonably fair. Combined with its varied weapons, locations, and gameplay situations, The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles is an overlooked NES platformer that deserves considerably more attention. Abadox takes the traditional NES shooter formula and gives it a disturbing biological twist. Instead of flying through ordinary space environments, you're traveling inside a gigantic living planet, surrounded by organs, flesh, eyeballs, claws, and other grotesque creatures. The adventure has 6 main stages, alternating between horizontal and vertical scrolling, followed by a short escape sequence. Like most classic shooters, you'll collect upgrades such as missiles, lasers, spread shots, speed boosts, and defensive abilities. Losing them can be painful during the harder sections, and Abadox definitely gets difficult. The enemies aren't always the biggest problem. It's often the level design itself. Some passages become extremely narrow while enemies and projectiles fill the screen, forcing you to learn positioning and react quickly. Bosses become more manageable once you understand their patterns and identify safe spots. Visually, this is where the game really impresses. The NES produces surprisingly detailed biological environments filled with colorful organs and bizarre enemy designs. Some bosses are enormous and grotesque, helping sell the feeling that you're fighting your way through a living organism. It doesn't offer many secrets or reasons to replay beyond the challenge, but Abadox remains a creative and visually memorable NES shooter. Even today, its strange organic environments help it stand apart from other shooters of its era. Ninja Gaiden immediately establishes its identity with a cinematic opening. A moonlit duel between two ninjas ends with Ken Hayabusa defeated, leaving his son Ryu a letter instructing him to take the clan's legendary sword and travel to America. Storytelling is one of the game's greatest strengths. Cinematic cutscenes appear throughout the adventure, pushing forward a surprisingly elaborate story involving demons, mysterious agents, and the ancient powers. At the time, this approach was unusual for an action platformer. The gameplay is just as memorable. Ryu moves quickly through 6 main stages, jumping between platforms, climbing walls, and cutting through enemies with his sword. Secondary weapons like throwing stars, boomerang shuriken, and spinning flames provide additional options against tougher enemies. The difficulty is brutal. Enemies constantly pressure you. Obstacles demand precise movement, and later bosses leave little room for mistakes. Learning enemy positions and mastering Ryu's movement becomes essential. Visually detailed environments, expressive sprites, and cinematic sequences create an impressive presentation for 1989. The action remains fast and readable even during chaotic sections. Ninja Gaiden demands patience, but its responsive controls, challenging stages, and cinematic storytelling made it much more than another action platformer, establishing the foundation for one of Tecmo's most recognizable franchises. Metal Storm is a great example of a game that deserved far more attention. Developed by Irem, the studio behind R-Type, it combines platforming and shooting with a gravity mechanic that completely changes how you navigate each stage. The controls are simple. One button jumps, another shoots, but pressing a direction while jumping lets you reverse gravity. Suddenly the ceiling becomes the floor, enemies react differently, and entire sections have to be approached from a completely different perspective. Some areas even wrap vertically, allowing you to fall through the bottom of the screen and appear at the top. What makes this mechanic work is how deeply it's integrated into the level design. Across 7 stages you'll encounter moving structures, gravity-controlled doors, enclosed arenas, and enemies whose attacks change depending on your orientation. There are also 3 different weapons, including one that fires through walls, and another that creates a rotating defensive projectile. The presentation complements the gameplay with mechanical enemies, darker science fiction environments, and impressive visual effects. More importantly, the controls remain precise even during complicated gravity sections. The main campaign offers a reasonable challenge and includes a password system, while completing it unlocks a considerably harder second quest. Metal Storm isn't memorable simply because of its gravity mechanic. It's memorable because the entire game is intelligently designed around it. Mega Man 6 arrived in 1993, extremely late in the console's life, when the industry was already moving toward a new generation. Despite using the familiar formula of its predecessors, Capcom managed to introduce enough new ideas to make this final 8-bit chapter surprisingly ambitious. The traditional 8 robot masters return, including Flame Man, Blizzard Man, Night Man, Plant Man, Tomahawk Man, and Yamato Man. Their stages are larger than before, with branching paths, hidden items, mini-bosses, and environmental mechanics that give exploration more importance. The biggest addition is the new Rush system. Instead of simply summoning his robotic dog, Mega Man can merge with Rush. Power Mega Man gains a powerful charged punch capable of destroying blocks and revealing secret routes, while Jet Mega Man receives a jetpack that allows limited flight. Both abilities are cleverly incorporated into the level design, especially during the later castle stages. There's plenty of visual variety as well. Oil can ignite into massive flames, underwater sections affect your jumps, enormous mechanical enemies fill the screen, and the later stages make impressive use of animation and environmental effects. Mega Man 6 doesn't reinvent the series, but it takes a formula refined across 6 games and pushes it about as far as the hardware could go. Larger stages, colorful environments, creative robot masters, and the Rush transformations make it a fitting conclusion to Mega Man's original run. The Manhattan Project arrived surprisingly late, but Konami clearly wasn't holding back. Instead of simply repeating the previous game, this sequel expands the beat-em-up formula with new attacks, more enemy variety, and some impressive presentation. The story is classic TMNT, Leonardo, Raphael, Donatello, and Michelangelo are enjoying a vacation in Florida when Shredder interrupts a television broadcast, kidnaps April O'Neil, and literally raises Manhattan into the air. Naturally, the turtles immediately head out to stop him. Combat feels noticeably more refined. Each turtle has a unique special attack that costs health, but when you're down to your final health point, specials can be used without draining it further. You can also grab foot soldiers and throw them over your shoulder, an extremely useful technique when the screen becomes crowded. After losing a life, you're even allowed to switch turtles. The presentation, this is another highlight. There's an elaborate opening sequence, a digitized voice sample, completely original music, expressive character animations, and plenty of visual humor. Enemies have more personality too, with foot soldiers using different attacks, and rock soldiers joining the fight. The Manhattan Project may have appeared when 16-bit consoles were already taking over, but it demonstrates how much Konami still understood the older hardware. With polished combat, colorful stages, excellent animation, and two-player action, it remains one of the strongest TMNT games of its generation. Tiny Toon Adventures 2 arrived in 1993 with a very different approach from the first game. Instead of building another traditional platformer, Konami turned the adventure into an amusement park filled with different attractions, each starring a member of the Tiny Toons cast. The main objective is to collect enough tickets to enter the funhouse. Plucky Duck takes on a bumper car challenge, Hampton rides across the roof of a moving train, Furball tackles a log ride, while Babs Bunny faces a roller coaster packed with obstacles. Completing these attractions earns golden tickets, eventually opening the final section with Buster Bunny. The individual challenges are simple, but they give the game plenty of variety. The train section feels closest to a more traditional platformer, while the funhouse brings back Buster's familiar running, jumping, and sliding mechanics, along with an actual attack. Visually, this is where the game really shines. Konami makes excellent use of bright colors, detailed backgrounds, smooth character animation, and even some impressive parallax effects. The sprites capture the cartoon characters remarkably well, giving the whole adventure the personality of the TV series. Its biggest weakness is simply that there isn't enough of it. Most attractions are relatively easy, and an experienced player can finish the entire game surprisingly quickly. Still, as a late generation to 8-bit release, Tiny Toon Adventures 2 is a colorful and technically polished showcase of what developers could still pull off with aging hardware. Shadow of the Ninja arrived in 1991 when ninja games were already everywhere, but Natsume still delivered a fast and polished action platformer. You play as Hayate Arcade, two ninjas fighting to overthrow Emperor Garuda, who is taking control of the United States. The entire adventure can also be played cooperatively with 2 players. The game is divided into 5 main levels, each containing several stages filled with platforming, enemies, and bosses. Both characters can run, jump, climb, hang from platforms, and attack. You begin with a katana, but can find the kusarigama for extra wrench or limited shuriken for ranged attacks. Picking up duplicate weapons upgrades them, while taking too much damage can reduce their power. Enemy variety is solid, ranging from soldiers and rival ninjas to armed robots and mutant creatures. The stages aren't particularly long, but later sections demand good timing and memorization, especially if you want to preserve health and stronger weapons for the bosses. Visually, Shadow of the Ninja has detailed sprites, varied environments, and smooth action. The soundtrack is even more impressive, with energetic tracks that fit the pace perfectly. It may not reinvent the genre, but its responsive controls, weapon system, challenging stages, and especially the 2-player co-op make Shadow of the Ninja a memorable action game that still plays remarkably well today. Splatterhouse Wanpaku Graffiti took the horror of the original Splatterhouse and transformed it into something completely different. Released for the Famicom in 1989, Namco created a colorful parody filled with horror references, dark humor, and surprisingly strong platforming. The story begins with Jennifer mourning Rick at his grave before lightning suddenly brings him back to life, mask included. Their reunion doesn't last long, as another strike awakens the Pumpkin King, who kidnaps Jennifer and sends Rick on a rescue mission. Instead of focusing on beat-em-up combat, Wanpaku Graffiti plays more like an action platformer. Rick carries an axe as his main weapon, while a rare shotgun provides limited ranged attacks. Defeating enemies also earns experience points, eventually extending your life bar. What really gives the adventure personality are its horror parodies. You'll find references to The Fly, Alien, Friday the 13th, Jaws, and even a dancing vampire inspired by Michael Jackson's Thriller. The game constantly mixes creepy imagery with goofy humor without losing the Splatterhouse identity. The visuals are especially impressive. Characters animate smoothly, backgrounds have plenty of detail, colors are vibrant, and some stages even feature parallax scrolling. Combined with creative enemies and environmental effects, it's easily one of the more visually distinctive Famicom games. Add a catchy horror-themed soundtrack and clever level design, and Wanpaku Graffiti becomes much more than a strange spin-off. It's a creative and technically impressive take on Splatterhouse that turned hardware limitations into a memorable visual style. Little Samson came out in 1992, when most players had already turned their attention to the Super Nintendo and Genesis. That unfortunate timing meant one of the most polished platformers of the late 8-bit era didn't receive nearly as much attention as it deserved. Developed by Takeru, it takes familiar platforming ideas and executes them remarkably well. The biggest feature is the ability to switch between 4 characters. Samson is balanced and can climb walls. The dragon can fly briefly and breathe charged fire. The golem is slow but incredibly strong and resistant to hazards like spikes, while the tiny mouse is fast, drops bombs, and can squeeze into areas the others can't reach. Knowing when to switch becomes an important part of progressing. The level design constantly puts these abilities to use. You'll cross moving and disappearing platforms, navigate lava pits, avoid projectiles, explore icy castles, and face enemies positioned to test your timing. The difficulty gradually increases, but the responsive controls keep most deaths feeling fair. Boss battles are another highlight. Huge creatures, undead knights, dragons, and transforming mages fill the screen with detailed animations and attack patterns that require patience to learn. Some encounters are especially impressive considering the hardware. Visually, Little Samson is beautiful. Colorful environments, expressive sprites, and exceptionally smooth animations show just how much Takeru managed to squeeze from the hardware. Once considered a hidden gem, today the game is widely recognized by retro fans as one of the finest and most technically impressive platformers of its generation. Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers shows how good Capcom was at turning Disney cartoons into enjoyable games. Released in 1990, it captures the personality of the animated series while delivering a simple and polished platformer. The adventure follows Chip and Dale as they attempt to rescue Gadget and eventually confront Fat Cat. Progress is made through a map with different routes, giving you some freedom to choose your next stage. Instead of traditional attacks, you pick up boxes and other objects and throw them at enemies. You can also hide underneath boxes for protection, a simple mechanic that works surprisingly well. One of the highlights is simultaneous 2-player co-op. Having Chip and Dale on screen together makes everything more entertaining, especially since players can even pick up and throw each other. The game isn't particularly difficult, but the responsive controls, varied stages, and comfortable pacing make it consistently fun. Visually, it remains charming, with colorful environments, expressive sprites, and smooth animations. Combined with its upbeat soundtrack and excellent presentation, Rescue Rangers remains a great example of Capcom's Disney era. Straightforward, polished, and still fun to play today. And those were 12 games that proved just how impressive 8-bit graphics could be. From colorful platformers to dark action games, developers created incredible worlds with very limited hardware. Which game do you think still looks the best today? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.